Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today's story is an intriguing tale that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more captivating narratives. Now, let's get into the story. I was working in a small business in Colorado when a man came in for an interview. He was polite enough, but didn't say much, and something just felt off. While my boss interviewed him, I stocked shelves, listening to the man answer our standard questions. What's your availability? Have you ever been arrested? Things like that. When he left, the manager asked me what I thought. There's something weird about him. I got really bad vibes, I said. The boss kind of chuckled at me and said, well, we can't deny someone's employment because of bad vibes. I took out my phone and Googled the guy's name. He had been arrested a few months prior for threatening to shoot up a convenience store after being accused of theft. He lied and said that he had never been arrested. Is that a good enough reason not to hire someone? It was, and it may have saved our lives. I remember June 2020, a beautiful, clear day. The calmness was broken by the sound of police cars flying down the road. A student had been murdered in the middle of the day on a nearby hiking trail. She had passed a group of hikers who very shortly later found her belongings abandoned on the ground. Concerned, they called park rangers, and shortly after, she was found stabbed to death, her body hidden in the bushes. Everyone was in shock. This was the second murder of a young student Colorado had had in just a few weeks. Was it a disgruntled fellow hiker? A jealous lover? No. The young woman had simply been at the wrong place at the wrong time. She did not know her killer, and he did not know her. He was a homeless man who was in the woods by the hiking trail, saw an opportunity, and took it. He had a fantasy about violating and killing a woman. The next day, the story made headlines, and plastered on the front was the killer's face. My stomach turned when I saw him. He looked so familiar. I didn't recognize the name, but then again, I've never been good with names. But I remember stories, and I Googled his name. The same story about a man being arrested for threatening to shoot up a convenience store came up, and instantly, I knew who he was. It was the same man I had convinced my boss not to hire. At the job, the majority of the shifts had only one or two of us working. I would have been alone with this guy at so many points, so many slow hours with few customers, and so many blind spots, so many opportunities for something terrible to happen. Knowing what he did, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of relief. It only took a few minutes for a murder to occur on a beautiful day on a hiking trail. So yes, those bad vibes may have saved our lives. When I was 22 and freshly broken up with my older boyfriend, I went a little wild with dating guys. At the time, I dressed very goth, even wearing a real corset and trench coat, mostly just enjoying the attention. One particular afternoon, my friend and roommate at the time decided to eat at a local Japanese restaurant in Seattle, with both of us all dressed up. Our waiter was a mediocre, skinny white guy who was clearly a little alternative, but it was hard to really tell with the uniform. We joked about me leaving my phone number for him or something, so I hyped myself up and did so. Late that night, he sent me a text message. We talked for a few days, never really finding the right time to meet up as I worked 40 minutes away from where I lived. He mentioned the boots that he wore meant a lot to him, and some other odd things that just seemed like edgy jokes. One really late night coming home, I was texting and driving as any 22-year-old might, and we decided to meet up. Foolishly, I invited him over to my apartment, where it was just me and the roommate who had been with me before. Our other 2 roommates were not home. At first, it was fine because I was already drunk, so I could just let him rant about whatever he wanted to. He went on about his life, going to jail, medical bills, his parents, etc. Eventually, he asked me if I wanted to see his tattoos, and I was like, okay. He lifted up his shirt, and not only could I see the handgun tucked in his waistband, but also his multiple badly covered up Nazi tattoos. One was even just slightly covered with a banana. I don't know what it was, but I simply decided the best way to deal with this situation was to appease him, so I went along with it casually. I don't remember every detail because it was over 3 years ago and I was drunk, but he ended up pulling his gun out and putting it to my head, asking me if I was scared. I was immensely confused and tried to call his bluff, saying I wasn't, which got him to put it away for a while. When we went to hook up in my messy room, he pulled it on me again, saying he wanted to do it with the gun out. I got mad and tried to fight him off of me and get it away from my head. Of course, I wasn't as strong as him, and he hit me in the arm with it, which hurt because it was a heavy one. When I finally got him off me, and he realized that I was angry, not scared, he started acting like a crackhead, saying I was crazy for not caring about him pulling a gun on me. He then ran off, jumping the fence of the apartment complex and not even taking the car he had come in. In the morning, his car was gone, and I had a large bruise from where he had hit me. Shaken, I confided in my roommate about what had happened. She convinced me to report the incident to the police. The authorities took my statement seriously, and a few days later, they informed me that they had arrested the guy. He had a long history of violent behavior and illegal possession of firearms. Looking back, I realize how incredibly dangerous that night was. I learned to be more cautious about who I let into my life, and I'm grateful for my roommate's support and the swift action of the police. What could have ended tragically became a lesson in trusting my instincts and the importance of seeking help when something feels wrong. As a child, I was prone to waking up suddenly in the middle of the night. I could feel the echoes of a noise that I couldn't recall, a silence that reminded me of something deafening, but there was never anything there. At first, I would simply try to return to sleep, but found myself unable to. At some point, I would roll out of my bed, tiptoe down the hallway, and try to wake up my sister so I wouldn't be alone in the dark. No matter how loud I yelled or how hard I shook her, she would never wake up. Eventually, I would give up, crawl into bed with her, and fall back asleep myself, comforted by her presence. I was just a little kid who looked up to his older sister, and I believed that she could protect me from anything, even in her sleep. As an adult, the problem persists. However, there's no one here to comfort me now. I live on my own, with no family in the area and no girlfriend to speak of. But I still find myself waking up in the dead of night, at least once a week. It is no longer to a silent sound that I can't recall, but instead to the cries of a screaming baby just one house over. I don't mind it so much. I know it must be more of a hassle for the parents than it is for me, but it can be tiresome. Instead of tossing and turning in bed, I brew myself some hot cocoa, adding just the smallest spike of Crown Royal whiskey, then make my way to my computer chair. There, I enjoy an hour or two of warm conversation with friends online before the fuzzy feelings of sleep invite me back to my bed. When I first awoke last night, I had no reason to think that this was any other than business as usual. If the baby had been crying, I seemed to have just missed it, but it wasn't something I gave much thought to. It was a bit earlier than usual, about 1 a.m., and I stayed at my computer until almost 4 a.m. sleep was not calling my name. But I knew if I didn't return to bed then, there wouldn't be another chance until the following night, as I had plans to meet my friend for a trip to the beach. So, I crawled into my bed, pulled the covers up over me, and let myself be comforted by the waves of warmth that followed. As was typical, I found myself rolling over here and there while waiting to succumb to my tiredness. But it never came. Rolling around quickly became tossing and turning, and I found myself constantly checking my phone. Outside, the sun had still not risen, something that began to confuse me as 6 a.m. rolled around. I had to wake up in an hour anyway, so I figured I might as well get an early start and take a shower. Before heading into the restroom, I stopped to look out the blinds of my window and was surprised to see there wasn't even a crack of dawn in the distance. I mused over whether or not I'd missed something important, as if I could drunkenly forget daylight savings in the dead of summer. The thought of it made me laugh, but that stopped when I returned from my shower. It was almost 7 a.m. now, but the sun still wasn't up. I flipped open my phone with frustration and began to Google search for my time zone, thinking that my Android's internal clock had simply messed up. But the internet showed the exact same time I was seeing on my device. This led me on a hunt across the house, checking the time on every piece of technology I had. Everywhere I looked, I found the same answer. From the computer in my office to the old watch I'd buried at the bottom of my junk drawer. When flipping through the channels of my television, everything seemed to still be playing late-night programming. There was no early morning news, no talk shows, and no traffic or weather reports. Instead, every station was playing classic Looney Tunes, syndicated family sitcoms, and the kind of infomercials people only witnessed when no one else was awake. I took to the internet, scouring every social media platform I could find to see if anyone else was noticing this too. Facebook had updates, minimal thoughts from people who stayed up a bit too late, but they all ended right before I woke up. I tried replying to posts and reaching out on Messenger, but no one got back to me. They didn't even leave me unread. Next, I tried my cell phone. I started with texts, but I was too impatient to wait for a response. I began to call every single number I had, even hotlines and businesses, but no one ever answered. I left messages everywhere, begging them to talk to me, begging them to tell me what was going on. But no matter what I threw into the void, no one answered. I even placed calls to the local police station. First, the non-emergency line, but then 911. I found an answering machine even there. I was greeted with an automated message. However, after hours of harassing people online and on my phone, it was now well past noon. I had checked my windows regularly to see if anyone else on the street was awake. But if they were, they never left their houses or even turned on the lights. I didn't blame them. I was scared to leave too. But at this point, I'd exhausted all my other options. And so I donned my shirt, slipped on my sandals, and made my way onto the street. There is something unsettling about trying to leave your house late at night. Despite the darkness, however, this wasn't night. It was technically now afternoon, though that fact only made it more intimidating to step out into the dark. I considered bringing some sort of weapon, but going and knocking on neighbors' doors with a crowbar in hand probably wouldn't get me invited in. I began my search 2 doors down, where I was on relatively good terms with the woman who lived there. We were the only 2 on the block who lived without families, just 2 single people in their smaller homes with spare rooms. There was an unspoken understanding between us that we reached out to each other first when in need of anything. Most of the families surrounding us had children, after all, and were less likely to have the time or resources to help. Her name was Anna, and she had knocked on my door some months ago in the middle of the night. She had hurt her hand pretty badly and didn't think she'd be able to work the steering wheel on her own. As such, she owed me an understanding reaction for knocking on her door if she wasn't already awake. But she didn't answer the door. I tried knocking on her windows and garage before giving up, but there was no response there either. I moved on to the house between us and immediately rang the doorbell. Again, no answer. I continued up and down the block, knocking on every door and window that I could. I gave up trying to be quiet, trying to only alert the person in the house, but I never heard a single noise in return. Even the house next to mine returned nothing but silence when I began beating my fists against the door. I couldn't believe it. This family had an infant son who cried at all hours of the night, yet he had no reaction now. In my frustration, I began kicking around their trash cans, trying to cause some sort of commotion to get anyone's attention, but to no avail. I returned to Anna's house, this time ready to let myself in. Her entrance was locked, but she was definitely the kind of person to forget about her back door. I let myself in, not bothering to sneak around or tiptoe as I wanted to alert her to my presence if it turned out she was actually home. I made my way to the end of her house, fully expecting to find an empty bed in an empty room. But it wasn't empty. There she was, just sleeping in bed. Her hair was a tad bit messier than usual, and it appeared she was naked, if the discarded clothes on the floor were any indication. But she was there and seemed perfectly fine. I said her name. I went from soft to shouting in a matter of seconds, unable to understand why I didn't wake her up before with all my yelling and knocking. Even at this close proximity, she remained asleep. However, what if she wasn't asleep? A chill ran through me as the thought entered my mind. I rushed to the side of her bed, checking for a heartbeat or trying to wake her up. I shook her. I screamed. I even tried hitting her, but nothing woke her up. Her heart beat faster and her breath became heavier, but she stayed unconscious. Even opening her eyes with my hands had no effect. I practically threw her across the room in a desperate attempt to break her out of her slumber, but she fell without any resistance, completely limp. She was a living corpse, unable to react to anything. But was she the only one? I made my way out of her house, grabbing a spare object on my way, a frying pan that Anna had left on the counter. I crossed her yard directly into our neighbors, to the family with a screaming baby that had now become silent, and began to smash their sliding glass door with my pan to create an entrance. I needed to see the parents, the children, the dog, to see if one of them would wake up. But none of them did. The parents shared their bed. The daughters were tucked in. And just like Anna, I was unable to wake them. I made my way to a room at the end of the hall. One I knew must house their infant son, since he was the only one I hadn't seen yet. He had a pulse and a heartbeat, just like the others, but he stayed asleep no matter what I did. I had dark thoughts of using the frying pan to bash his head in, daring him to move, daring him to end this insane prank that the whole town seemed to be playing on me, to cry like he did every night. But I stopped myself. Instead, I was the one who cried. It wasn't manly, it wasn't smart, but it was what I did. I just sat there in that little boy's room and cried, not knowing what else to do. Even calling the police had just led to an answering machine. What else was there? I was all alone in the dark of night. At least, that was what I thought, before hearing a noise from behind me. I froze, equal parts excited and terrified at the prospect that someone else might be awake. I looked around, trying to figure out where it had come from. I was certain it had to be in the house. Then I heard the noise again, and a feeling of familiarity began to creep over me. It was a sound I could never describe, one that I could never remember. Yet somehow, it was one I could never forget. It was the sound that woke me up each night as a child, the sound that faded away as I returned to consciousness, leaving me to think I only imagined it in the silence. And it was in the room with me. I turned slowly to see the thing that made the sound behind me, barely visible from the shadows of the little boy's closet. It didn't look like a person, and yet it wasn't a monster either. It was impossibly tall, with arms even longer than its legs. It had a hunch to stop its head from pushing straight through the ceiling, and it smiled from ear to ear. No, that wasn't a smile. It didn't have cheeks or skin on its face. It just had teeth that stretched from one ear to the other to make it look like it was smiling. But it wasn't. It reached across the room from the little boy's closet, its fingers finding my face from almost a foot away from its palms, and it began to search me. It touched every muscle, every pore, every cell in my skin as it explored my features, as if it were blind. But it was staring right at me with its dark eyes. This was the thing that woke me up at night, the thing that woke up this little boy, that made him cry out in the darkness because of what he had heard, or perhaps even seen. I could feel it in its touch, its loneliness. It had followed me throughout my life, shrieking its strange shriek in the silence that somehow only I could hear, daring me to wake up, daring me to notice it. And I finally did. Today, it got me to look it in the eyes and share in the horror of the deafening shrieks it made with its teeth somehow slammed together while it searched my face. The little boy woke up too, crying just like he did every other night. The creature in the closet turned away from me, its fingers no longer caring to explore me, and instead focused on that poor little boy. I wanted to get in the way. I wanted to yell or scream or hit this monster with a frying pan, but I just ran. I ran away from the room, from the house, from the street, and ran until I couldn't run anymore. The baby's cries suddenly stopped before I was out of earshot. I don't know why, and I don't think I want to. I just hope it was that he was like everyone else, that he just went back to sleep. But I don't think that's how this works. It has now been over 24 hours. The sun was supposed to rise again, but I know it won't. In every house on the street I broke into, I found someone sleeping, but I didn't try to wake them up. The farther I went, the more I began to fear that this was everywhere, and this pattern of living corpses would stretch on forever. My tiredness comes and goes. Sometimes I feel like I'm on the brink of passing out, and I welcome it. Then I hear the thing shrieking in the distance, and I'm brought back to a lucid state. No matter how far away I get, I can still hear it, and it's getting closer. As I write this, I'm on the edge of Portland, Oregon. I found an unlocked door and let myself in, needing to refresh myself with a shower and get some food. I doubt the owner will ever wake up, but in case he does, I'm writing this note for him. I wish I could write more, but I know that the creature is coming for me. I was careful sneaking in here, but no matter how far I go or how quiet I am, it does seem to find a way to catch up with me. I've decided to steal this man's key and take his car. I'm not proud of this action, but it seems to be the only way I'll be able to get to the next town over without crossing paths with that monstrosity again. I've decided to head north to Seattle, where my brother lives. I think he'll be awake, but that has never been the case when I sought his comfort in the night. Instead, I just hope to find him asleep. Perhaps if I spend the night in his bed, I'll fall asleep as well, like I did when we were children. If this message does manage to be found, I hope its story can help others on those nights where you awaken before the sun comes up, when you could have sworn you heard something, but find yourself surrounded only by silence. Know that you aren't crazy, and whatever you do, go back to sleep if you can. Perhaps if I spend the night in his bed, I'll fall asleep as well, like I did when we were children. And maybe, just maybe, I'll never wake up again.